Chapter 3. Stark had grown more and more ill-tempered each day of his married life. The truth was that he was tormented with jealousy over his wife. He continually imagined that other men looked upon her with desire, and accused her of encouraging them furtively. She used to enjoy looking on at the celebrations and dances, but after a time he even forbade her to do that. And when she was with child, he once declared in a rage that it was not his. That was pure nonsense, as was nearly everything he said of or to his wife. And now that the baby was born, he behaved still more outrageously. When he learned that Bluebird was staying away for a while, he pouted and refused to see her and the baby. It was reported that all day and late into the night, he lay out in the tall grass among the horses that were picketed behind the cousin's teepee, and watched to see who went to call on Bluebird. When this was rumored around, people laughed at him. How shameful to pout like a woman, the men said. He has always been a queer fellow, without close friends. Even as a boy he had none. His kind do not take to fasting or warfare, but if at least he were a tolerable hunter. But neither the disapproval of the older men nor the ridicule of his contemporaries spurred Stark to be more dutiful as a husband. If anything, the effect was to make him more and more active in finding ways to hurt his wife. He reached a limit when he decided to throw her away publicly. During a great victory dance attended by many visitors from neighboring camp circles, he waited until the crowd was biggest, and then, at an intermission, he forced his way in, snatched one of the highly decorated sticks used by the drummers, and stood motionless, holding it high. That was the way to gain an audience's full attention when one wanted to take a part in the ceremonial giveaway. Only persons of social standing were qualified to do this, because of their past record of hospitality, generosity, war achievements, or the like. But here was Stark, who had no such record. The crowd waited in silence. What was this fellow going to do? Arrogantly he held the stick high for one dramatic moment, and then cried out, "This is that woman. Whoever needs a woman to fetch his fuel and water can have her." He flung the heavy drumstick into the crowd. Fearful of being struck, the people pushed back in waves. Nobody scrambled for the stick. He knew nobody would. All he wanted was to hurt and shame Bluebird, and that he did. It was a foolish and uncalled-for act, but wholly characteristic. Instead of enhancing the man, as it might if he had cried, "This is a horse for the needy," what he said only lowered his already low standing. Moreover, Stark had insulted a victory dance. Throwing away a wife was a custom, to be sure, but this was not the place. If it must be done at all, it should be at some social dance where the mood was properly light and reckless. Even then it was a custom shunned by men of standing, who considered it beneath them to air their emotions publicly. The way to leave an unfaithful wife was to send her away or to walk out of her life without so much as a backward glance. Only vain and weak men gave vent to their temper in public, as Stark had done. It was also wrong because Bluebird had not been unfaithful, and this was generally known. Stark not only succeeded in losing a good wife and making a fool of himself, he earned such public disfavor that he could not remain in the camp circle. He left immediately, his destination unknown. Naturally, Bluebird was hurt by that undeserved public insult, but she was not nearly so crushed as Stark had intended her to be. The fact was that at the time of the festivities, in the center of the camp circle, she sat in her cousin's teepee, sick at heart over something infinitely more vital to her, even than her honor, for her baby was dying. Do what she would, Bluebird could see that the little Waterlily was growing steadily weaker. All that day she had lain motionless and refused to eat, nor did any of the medicinal roots the cousin brought from the neighbors help her. When a mother from the opposite side of the circle heard of the symptoms, she came hurrying across with a powdery substance obtained in the Bad Lands and known as earth smoke, saying, "Try this next. It always cured my children. A pinch of it in a little water." But Waterlily could not swallow it. All hope was dwindling fast. In a few hours the child would die unless something was done. Bluebird must pray. Inexperienced in such holy matters, she nevertheless determined to make some kind of appeal for divine aid. But how to proceed? Mechanically, she thrust her hand into the flat rawhide bag which was her purse, and which contained her personal effects, and a small otter skin, very evenly painted a bright red. She had hurriedly salvaged this one object from her father's belongings that fatal day, and had prized it ever since. She was sure it must be potent with supernatural power, although her father had never said so. She only knew that he had venerated it above all else. Perhaps possibly it would save her baby. Then she took some smoking mixture of tobacco and red willow bark and tied a bit of it into squares of deerskin. Making 10 tiny bundles no bigger than her thumb, she knew she must make some sacrificial offerings. Fumbling in her haste, she muttered to herself, "Is that right? Alas, what do I know about it? Those who know tell of something holy, Taku Wakan, that has supreme power. But I never understood. It is so remote. What right have I?" All the while she worked in a desperate race with death. Throughout the Great Plains and the wooded country near the Rockies, wherever the people moved, she had seen here a rock or there a tree with red paint on it, and sometimes a once beautiful blanket or other gift rotting there. She knew what that meant. Everyone knew. Those rocks and those trees had been set apart and consecrated. They were individual altars where people had prayed in times of stress. She was going to make her own altar now. Taking up the baby and clutching in her free hand the bag with its special contents, Bluebird left the teepee and walked away unnoticed. On and on she walked, until the noise of the festivities died away, and the camp circle was no longer in sight. She stopped in utter stillness beside a great rock in the midst of an empty plain. She studied the rock and saw that though it was well embedded in the earth, the exposed part was nearly as tall as she. It sat apart from any other object as though already reserved for her. It sat on virgin ground. Surely no human had ever stood where she stood now. She carefully laid all but lifeless infant on her wrap, spread on the ground, and set immediately to work, covering one side of the rock with red ochre face paint. Then carefully spread her father's hollowed otter skin on top of the rock, like a covering for its head. Next she planted a stick upright in front of it. The painted side had become the rock's face. She had personalized it. To the top of the stick, which stood waist high, she tied the 10 little tobacco bundles. They were on a short string of uneven lengths and dangled, now clustering and now separating in the faint breeze that came and went. In descriptions of sacrificial altars where men fasted and prayed in some lonely spot, the essential property was unvarying: 100 bundles of tobacco. But 10 was all that she could manage. It would have to do. The hot summer sun beat down in all its fury. The earth danced in continuous ripples around the rim where it met the sky. Once the baby whimpered weakly. Everything was ready as Bluebird could make it. Now for the prayer, which was of utmost importance. The prayer should be audibly released into the infinite. She had heard somewhere. She began speaking to the Great Spirit, Wakan Tanaka, in the rock. Although but haltingly, fearful lest she not pray correctly, she said, "O grandfather, hear me. Since the very beginning you have been there. Before there were any men, you were here. And it is certain that long after we are all gone you will remain. Hear me, grandfather, and pity me. I want my baby to live." Right or wrong, that was the prayer. Overwhelmed by her daring, she stood motionless, waiting for what she didn't know. Presently someone said in her ear, quite clearly, "Hao." It was the Dakota word of approval and consent. Quickly, Bluebird covered her face with both hands and bowed her head for whatever was to follow. A man must have stolen up behind her while she was praying, maybe an enemy ready to kill her. So be it. Inert and without clear thought, she waited a long time, but nothing happened. Very slowly she raised her head and uncovered the face to look about her, behind her, and then further off, and finally to the whole round horizon. In the vast emptiness she stood alone. I have prayed all right, and my prayer is heard. My baby will live. A strange lightness and an unearthly joy seized her, and a new boldness born of confidence swept away all her girlhood diffidence. Holding her hands to her mouth like a trumpet, she first called out, then shouted, and finally screamed her enraptured thanks. Grandfather, you have made me thankful. Screaming this over and over until her throat ached, she whirled about, throwing her voice in all directions in a frantic aim to reach the whole of space with her thanks. But that sort of elation could not last. Soon enough she was back to reality and began to contemplate her unhappy lot. Through no fault of her own, she had just been cruelly shamed in public. It was so merciless, so unfair. Feeling sorry for herself, she wailed aloud. In the customary way, she addressed all her dead relatives in turn, her parents, her brothers, her aunts, and uncles, ending with the forlorn question no one can answer. Where have you gone? Where have you gone? It was always good to let sorrow out, and bad to hold it in. She felt much better when she had had her fill of unrestrained weeping. She dried her eyes, fitting the base of her palms into her eye sockets, as all women did. She picked up her child, but its limp body no longer distressed her as she departed, leaving the rare otter skin to be with the Great Spirit forever. To no one less would she ever have relinquished what her father once venerated. Everyone was at the dancing when she re-entered her cousin's teepee. She was glad it was vacant, that she would not have to account for herself. What she had been through was not for common telling. Once more she offered the earth smoke, and Waterlily was able to swallow it this time. Gradually the infant seemed not to be in such pain as before. She fell asleep, and after a while was recovered. Bluebird was not surprised. She had prayed for that, and had her answer already. Elated about her child, she heard something almost without emotion, that visitors from another camp had recognized her old grandmother as one of the family who had never come back, and would take the news of her and her grandmother back home. Your grandson, Black Eagle, has long mourned for you, the grandmother was told. As soon as we get home, he will be coming for you. And so he did. And at last, Bluebird, her child, and her grandmother were back where they belonged, where their many relatives welcomed them with tears of grief for the dead and of joy for the living.